So you can talk about theory and read books and read blogs on the internet all day long. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to take some of the cases that we've handled, and we've appeared on DUI cases over 1,600 times this year alone. We want to take those cases and tell you about some real world examples that we've achieved for our clients this year. So, Shahina, we love to talk about the cases where you go to trial and you win, and you can picture the judge doing his gavel, right? You're like, yeah, not guilty. But they don't always go that way. There are other ways to win a DUI case.
Correct.
Let's talk about one of those. You had a client who was a kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about him.
He's this 19-year-old kid who is a TikTok influencer, and he has thousands of followers. Not only that, I knew he was a good kid because his parents cared. So they came to every single court date. When I was talking to him on the phone, they were on the phone as well. So I knew he was in good hands, and I trusted him to make the right decision when it comes to later on when I was preparing for trial or whatever the case was. But I don't think the state can meet its burden from the discovery they have given us. Basically, discovery is any evidence that they have collected against my client. When I was reviewing it, there are portions that were missing, and I decided to play my cards.
All right. So there's, police reports, standard field sobriety test reports, breathalyzer reports, if that applies. There can be medical reports, crash reports, videos from the officer, or videos from the squad, videos from back at the police station. There can be a lot of discovery evidence in a DUI case. And a couple key things were missing. Tell me a little bit about what you thought might have been missing.
The booking video had a portion where he refused missing because the officer said he refused the test. There's video up to the point that he was taken into custody, where he was getting booked, and that portion where he was supposed to take the test and where the officer said he refused was cut out. And then it was good 10 minutes, and then it was him signing the paperwork and getting released.
Interesting.
So there was no refusal.
Right. So, some of these things, your mind sort of goes to this. I mean, nefarious, they may be messing with things. Maybe not, right? There's technical issues. There's, shift changes. There's a million different reasons. We deal with these things from time to time. But the point is there were some things, you thought that there were some holes in the prosecution's case against your client.
Correct.
And so what did you do?
So initially when I was preparing for this, I was preparing for the first part of a DUI case, which is a petition to rescind the statutory summary suspension. A suspension hits right after you get picked up for a DUI, 46 days after. So I wanted to make sure that my client could drive. He used to drive for work, and he mentioned how crucial it is because he financially provides for his family as well. So I knew going in, at least we can win the first part of a DUI case, which is for him to get his license back. And we did. That was the first part. And then the second part is the actual DUI case. This was an accident. He hit another person's car. This was 5 o'clock in the morning. He said he had a very long day at work. He stayed over at his girlfriend's house. He fell asleep for a quick second, and he kind of scraped the side of the car next to him. And he was awoken, and he got pulled over, and he was taken into custody. Thankfully,
nobody's hurt. We have a minor accident. We have a DUI arrest, but there's sort of a missing evidence here. There's no breathalyzer result. You refused that. What did you decide to do? Did you decide to go to trial, or how did you handle it?
No. So going to trial always places my client in a position where if he is found guilty, ultimately there might be a conviction or maybe even jail time because that's the charge. So I wanted to see if we can resolve it behind closed doors because it's up to the prosecutor to dismiss the ticket. Again, I wanted to see if I could try my best because he's just a 19-year-old in college trying his best to make ends meet, providing for his family. So I wanted to talk to the prosecutor and see if they can just dismiss the ticket.
And
it worked.
So I think that brings up a good point. A lot of people don't realize that every case goes in one of two directions. Either you go to trial and a judge says guilty or not guilty, or you work out some sort of an agreement. And essentially, many times that's a plea agreement, but essentially what you did here is you decided to negotiate, or at least speak with the prosecutor about the case, who your client is, what evidence is missing, what may happen if you proceed, the strength or weakness of the case against our client. That is either formally or informally a negotiation, right? Or at least a closed door discussion, like you put it. And sometimes that results in an agreement. Sometimes it doesn't. Here, the agreement was to dismiss the DUI charge.
Yes.
That doesn't happen all that often.
It doesn't.
No.
Very
and so it's
rarely.
great when it does.
Yeah.
And, the basis for that probably is that there was something missing from the evidence,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, if the prosecutor has a strong case, they're far less likely to dismiss the case. So the evidence, like most things in a criminal courtroom, the evidence sort of leads you to whatever that ultimate result is.
Correct.
It's up to the attorney to recognize those strengths and weaknesses, recognize what evidence is there or not there.
Yes.
And to your credit, that's what you did.
I did.
And chose the right path in proceeding forward, which ultimately wound up getting the case dismissed.
Yes.
Sheena, the firm had a case not too long ago that you handled, and I know there was a good outcome for the client. Tell me a little bit about who that client was.
So one of my favorite clients, he was one of the nicest human beings ever. He came into the office and said he got a DUI. He's a Spanish speaker, so we had an interpreter present. He was undocumented, so he said he really doesn't have a lot to lose. So he said, even if I get deported, so be it. We did talk about his immigrations, what his options are if he does not want to go to trial. And he worked at this kitchen locally where he was helping out. He was washing dishes, and then he worked at another restaurant at night. So he was working 2 different jobs just to make ends meet.
And then so what happens? He tells you the story that he left work or was about to leave work, and what happened?
He corroborated 100% with what the officer wrote, and he did not change his testimony at all. He was truthful about it. So he said he finished a long day of work. He was outside talking about life problems with his friends, and they had 2 cans of beer. He said he had a drink in half, and the other half was something that he just decided to put in his cup holder and wanted to drop off his friend who lived about 5 minutes away from the restaurant. So he went, dropped off his friend, and then while he was going home, he got pulled over.
Wow, what happened?
So he doesn't speak English at all, and he converses with his colleagues, but usually they use Google Translate, or there's someone to translate everything. So he knew and he anticipated what would happen. He knew the officer would ask for his license and registration. He had that ready, but he did not know how to communicate. So he just stayed quiet the entire time, which helped in our case.
Yeah, probably a smart move.
Right. And then he was asked to step out of the car to perform the standard field sobriety test. I'm sure he was confused, but he said no, which is the right thing to do. So he said no. I think primarily from what he was explaining is because he didn't know what was going on, and he didn't want to do something that would ultimately cause him to go to jail. He
did get arrested. He did go to jail, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what happens next? He goes to the police. They took him to the police station?
Yes. They took him to the police station. They booked him, and then he said he needs a Spanish interpreter present. So they called a Spanish interpreter to talk about everything. They read the warnings to motorists. They explained the booking to him, and then he was released.
Okay, so did he refuse the breathalyzer there at the station?
He did, yes.
He did, okay. So then this case comes to you in the office here. We've got a guy who's undocumented, only speaks Spanish. Tell me a little bit about sort of after you had assessed the case, what did you decide to do?
I had a meeting with him. I had to sit down and explain what the case will entail. I explained to him the 2 processes that we have. First is the PTR, which is for him to get his driving privileges back, and the second, the case itself. I went over everything. I went over everything in detail as to what happened, and I honestly said, I don't think we're going to win this PTR, but I do recommend going and doing this PTR hearing because I want to know how you would do on the stand, what the officer would be like, and if anything, it would help us at trial if we need to impeach the officers. So it worked out well.
So just for the people maybe have not been through this. You chose to have a hearing in front of the judge where the judge would decide whether or not to basically eliminate the suspension of his driver's license.
Correct, yes.
And that's totally different than the actual DUI trial itself.
Yes.
And so you had that hearing. You prepared him and said, you're probably not going to win this hearing. And that is what happened, right?
Yes.
Right. So he was suspended. He spent a period of time not having a valid driver's license. But you then proceeded on to dealing with the actual criminal charge of driving under the influence. Tell me about that.
So before going to trial, I sat down, and if I were to call him on the stand, which I wouldn't for a trial because it's the state's burden to prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So I went over his testimony just in case I need to rebut something or if he becomes a witness that the state calls up.
Sure.
So I went over his testimony in person. We took a couple hours just to hash out everything that was said at trial, the PTR hearing, and what he might have to testify at trial. So I prepped him for that. I also prepped him that he did pick up 2 other petty tickets while he was pulled over. So I said maybe the judge might split the baby and give the state a guilty on the petty speeding, and you will ultimately be found not guilty on the DUI. He understood, and that's exactly what happened.
Right. So tell me about the trial.
Trial was really fun. It's one of the first trials I've done at DDT. And when I began cross-examining the officer, I was kind of nervous just because he was so well-trained. He had his air ride, very well-reputed officer from what I've heard from my colleagues. So he took the stand, and when I was cross-examining, he said he did not remember what NHTSA manual was or getting any type of DUI training.
Wow.
NHTSA manual is like the Bible for DUI.
Sure.
If you don't recognize that there is some such thing as NHTSA or going through the training, it's not going to be beneficial for you.
No.
So that worked really, really well in our favor. And I argued that the officer was not credible. He didn't know what he was doing. So.
Yeah. And the judge said the two magical words of
not guilty.
Right.
Yes.
And so I guess the lesson there is, well, one, you thought you had a good case to begin with, notwithstanding bringing the beer in the car and things like that, right? And obviously should never drink and drive. But in that situation, he did the right things, right? He didn't try to talk his way out of it. That doesn't work. He didn't try to, be a gymnast doing the field sobriety test. That doesn't work. He didn't try to, predict the outcome of a breathalyzer that he just, wasn't sure what the result would be. So he avoided it, right?
He refused, yes.
He refused. So he did those things right, given the circumstances that he put himself into. So you believed that you could win that DUI trial.
Yes.
And the cherry on top is that sort of unknown in any DUI trial, which is the testimony. You're just not sure what's going to come out. You can prepare, but you're not sure exactly what a witness is going to say on that stand. Unfortunately, as is often the case, an officer did not testify all that well.
Yes.
And so that's the lesson there, right? Is if you think you've got a case, things may break open even better for you at trial. Let's talk a little bit about that NHTSA. So NHTSA is the DUI, essentially, to keep it in layman's terms, the DUI training that an officer goes through.
Yes.
And this officer said he was not even aware of it?
No. He didn't know what NHTSA was, what it stood for, if he had any training at the academy or a refresher course.
Wow. Were you able to hide your smile when the officer testified to that?
Yes, I had a good poker face.
Because that the judge, this is a DUI judge in a DUI room. He knows what NHTSA is. He knows what those standards are. The judge and many defense attorneys like us know these standards better than the police officer.
Correct.
And so when the officer testified to that, I'd say your case was pretty much a winner then, right?
Yeah.
Good. So the client was pretty happy about this?
He was very happy, yes.
Good. So there you have it. You've heard some outcomes of cases that we've been able to achieve for our clients. Now, these are real Illinois drivers just like you. The goal here was to teach you a little bit about your rights, about the law, and hopefully provide a little bit of clarity if you are ever in this sort of situation. Thanks for watching.